Iron Menace is the new for 2024 B&M dive coaster at Dorney Park in Allentown, Pennsylvania. It's the park's largest investment since Hydra the Revenge in 2005. They haven't received a brand new roller coaster in almost 20 years. The ride sits in the back of the park by Possessed on the former land that was occupied by Stinger. That was technically the last roller coaster they added, which opened in 2012 and closed in 2017, and it was a relocation from another park. There were a lot of options for the space. It really was prime real estate. Originally, the park was looking at adding a Gravity Group shuttle coaster, but then it would have meant removing Possessed. They had all these different proposals for different projects, and then B&M pitched them a dive coaster, and they said, yes, that is what we want. It is completely unique to this area. Your closest one at another park is probably Griffin at Busch Gardens, Williamsburg. Without traffic, it's just over 5 hours away. And when you have nearby competitors like Hershey Park and Six Flags Great Adventure that seem to be constantly pumping out new investment, it was really important for Dorney to do something right. And I'm thrilled that Cedar Fair finally gave them this big new investment. It's been a long time coming, and the ride delivers. Has a 152-foot, 95-degree descent, top speed 64 miles per hour, and a total of 4 inversions. It is not a long ride, but Iron Menace makes the most of what it has been given. It's a very narrow layout, technically only features one turn in the entire ride, which is a left-handed turn into the brake run. As the typical dive coaster trains with 3 rows, 7 people across, that is the same as Dr. Diabolical's Cliffhanger at Six Flags Fiesta, Texas. This is a mid-sized dive coaster, so rides like Griffin, Valraven, and Yukon Striker are obviously a lot bigger. But this ride sits just a little bit taller than Dr. Diabolical's Cliffhanger, features a little bit less track length, but more inversions. So if you've experienced that ride down at Fiesta, Texas, it's absolutely the ride I would most similarly compare Iron Menace to. Now, Iron Menace is the anchor of a newly themed area called the Steel Yard. It also includes rides like Possessed and the new MT Buckets, which is their old flying scooters, just rethemed. It's the first time that Dorney has really attempted a themed area outside of Planet Snoopy. Iron Menace itself has a pretty well-themed queue. The land, though, I would say is a little lackluster. The theming that is there is nice, but it was just a little unfortunate when we've seen some pretty well-themed sections such as Jungle X at King's Dominion, Adventure Port at Kings Island, or the Boardwalk at Cedar Point. It seems like a lot more was done for those areas, and maybe Dorney Park received some budget cuts. They couldn't do as much, but I like the sign that they have up. The gift shop looked nice. But the theme of Iron Menace is actually really cool. It follows the story of a 1900s businessman named Hiram McTavish. That's actually a direct reference to Knott's Berry Farm. That name can be seen on a gravestone over in Ghost Town, which is really, really cool. I love that they're tying everything together with the Cedar Fair universe. A little bit later, further down in the extended queue, you can see this big FBI surveillance van. The company that's investigating this area is the same that is investigating Flight of Fear over at Kings Island. Really, really cool. But McTavish ran a steel mill which closed and he mysteriously disappeared. And all that remains is what you see here. A decrepit shell full of rusty relics. Clearly it's haunted. And the roller coaster is meant to be a steel hauler used to transport workers at record-breaking speeds. And he dubbed it the Iron Menace. It's a really well thought out backstory. Now, does that come out to the average guest as they're waiting in the queue? I would say yes and no. I think riders will absolutely be able to tell that this is like an abandoned steel mill, and the paranormal van will tell them that, yeah, something shady's going on, you need to investigate it. But beyond that, that's really it. But it's still more than anything we've ever seen before at Dorney. It's easily the best themed ride in the park. It's not even close. Most of the theming can be seen in the lower levels of the queue, although the station looks great. The rest of the stations at Dorney are very bare bones. This has a beautiful color palette, and all the workers are dressed to look like they're working in a steel factory. It's not your basic Cedar Fair uniforms, which is really awesome. That's not something we've really seen at any other Cedar Fair park outside of like shows. I think main critique that stood out to me as of my first visit is I definitely think they need to put some shade up over in that extended queue, because I've been to Dorney in the summer. I know how hot it can get, and that outdoor queue, if it's full, is going to be brutal. Now, let's talk about that ride experience. When you board one of your 3 rows, you're going to pull down your vest restraint. These are the same that we have on all the newer dive coasters that have come out. They're very comfortable. It prevents any possibility of headbanging. But I know I've mentioned this with other dive coasters that feature them. The main downside is that it does limit the airtime that you could get on the first drop. The airtime is there, but you definitely feel like snug like you're in there. Another design upgrade that we saw with Iron Menace and also with Dr. Diabolical is you don't have those big floors that drop out right before you dispatch. There's a small one in front of row 1, but usually one of the things that would hold up dispatches is you have to wait for the floors to drop, and then as you're coming back into the station, you have to wait for the floors to rise back up. That's extra time that you could be spending loading new riders on or getting people off. So it's a great upgrade to see with these newer dive coasters. Now as you dispatch out of the station, you start up your massive lift hill. And Iron Menace features a first for any dive coaster in the US. It doesn't have a turnaround. You crest over and immediately hold out for that beyond vertical drop. So as a result, you don't have quite as much time to take in that view before the ride kicks in. I think Iron Menace actually has one of the best views at the top because you can see all of the other roller coasters at Dorney Park. It is beautiful. I think that would be an awesome lift walk to do one day. Another interesting design difference as a result of not having a turnaround at the top is that the chain that holds riders at the top of the drop is the same chain that pulls you up from the bottom. Usually the ride vehicle has to catch on to a second chain that is designed just to hold you there, but this is just one long chain the whole time. Riders will dang there over the edge for a couple seconds before plunging down to the ground. I don't know if you can feel so much that it's beyond vertical. Like in reality, the drop doesn't feel that different than those that just feature a plain vertical drop. You'll probably feel it a bit more in the back. The front is obviously going to have the best view. Try them both out if you can. One little detail that I like that they have at the bottom of this drop is this like melted steel pot. They kind of teased it in the initial animation, and while it certainly doesn't look like that in real life, it's still a nice effect to mimic the idea that you're dropping into this really hot boiling pot. Now, sure enough, that first element after the drop is a massive Immelman. This is inversion number 1 of 4, and coming out of this element, that was my first moment of graying out. This was actually a rather intense beginning, pulling some pretty strong G-forces. Now, unfortunately, coming out of this Immelman is the first spot on the ride that is not the smoothest. Even in this on-ride reaction, you can see how our bodies are just jostling around. It's way more prominent on sections of the coaster that have positive Gs as opposed to negative Gs, but it does exist throughout the whole layout, which made me sad because dive coasters back in the day used to be like the smoothest rides ever. But some of these newer dive coasters, specifically since the Vest came out, I've noticed aren't like that. And I don't know if rough is necessarily the right word to describe it, but it certainly isn't glass smooth. And I'd be lying if I said it didn't take away from the ride experience. Luckily, the Vest restraints on the ride make it at least bearable because you don't have anything that you can bang your head on. But let's say that you take an end seat, it is way more exaggerated than if you take a middle seat. So for that reason, I do recommend sitting as close to the center of the track as you can. Those end seats can be like kind of bad at times. Your next element is a nice big floaty 0G roll. Really nice graceful inversion. I really like this moment on dive coasters. I think it works really well. And then Iron Menace features the first ever incline loop on a dive coaster. We've seen a vertical loop before, but this one is tilted. And you know what? It's pretty intense. Coming out of there was the second moment that I grayed out on this ride, which I did not expect. But even when you just look at it from off the ride, you can see how tight this thing is. This element was the biggest surprise for me. I'd love to see it on more dive coasters in the future. Immediately after is Iron Menace's final inversion, which is a corkscrew. And the top of this corkscrew is also another one of those spots where you can just see the riders just shake back and forth. But it is not as bad as the final turn into the brake run. This is the spot that has everyone online talking. It is a very abrupt jolt that unfortunately will be the last thing that you remember as your ride on Iron Menace comes to an end. You can literally see all the riders' heads go from side to side as they traverse through this one spot. It's very brief, and let me just clarify, it doesn't hurt. Like, you will not be in pain because of this moment. But does it feel wrong? Oh yeah, absolutely. It is a very clear manufacturing defect. Now, I am not an engineer. However, no other spot on this roller coaster feels like that, and no other spot on any other B&M coaster that I can think of has a moment like this. I feel like it has to be an alignment issue, maybe with one of the rails. Something is causing the train to move like that, and I feel like that is not going to be good for this ride. I hope it's something that they're able to get fixed soon, because if I were Dorney Park, I would not be thrilled that that moment exists on a brand new roller coaster. I hope that's something that B&M is able to get fixed, because as a first-time rider, it seemingly comes out of nowhere and is very unexpected. But that does not mean that this is a bad ride at all. I think the layout is good, it's obviously short, but it doesn't waste any time. Some dive coasters will throw in just like a random helix that doesn't do a whole lot, or have like a moment to purposefully extend a ride's runtime. Iron Menace doesn't have that. Every element that is there for a reason, and it works. There is no mid-course brake run, the train keeps a consistent speed, and I really appreciated that. For that reason, I do prefer it over Dr. Diabolical's Cliffhanger at Six Flags Fiesta Texas. For me, that mid-course just hits too hard. It kills the momentum. Even though it's a longer ride than Iron Menace, at least with this coaster, you feel very content with that complete experience that you have from start to finish. But I do have to give Dr. Diabolical the edge when it comes to theming, at least with the queue. But they both have their pros and cons, so you have to go out and experience both. Let me know which one you prefer. For Iron Menace's final score, I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. It is definitely not perfect, but is it enjoyable? Yeah, absolutely. Is it a great fit for Dorney? 100%. Is it my favorite coaster at Dorney? No. But would I ride it every time I go? Probably more than once? Definitely. I'm really happy that this ride exists here. It complements every other roller coaster in the park, and I think it is going to be a big hit with the public. So let me know down in the comments below if you've experienced Iron Menace, what you thought of it, if you agree with the points that I brought up. If you're planning to ride it soon, let me know what you're most looking forward to. And of course, stay tuned for more reviews here at Coaster Studios, and I'll see you next time.